Welcome to the Maranatha Global Bible Study. I'm Daniel Thomas Lancaster with First Fruits of Zion, back with you here at the EMMAUS table as a guest teacher for part 5 of a study titled Satan in Chains. Today, I'll give you a sample of an apocalyptic reading of Revelation 12. And if you like this and want to do more of this type of Bible study, I've got to encourage you to join Torah Club for the big year-long study that's beginning this fall called End of Days. You can check it out at endofdays.org. I encourage you to do so. endofdays.org. Here's the problem. If Satan is defeated, if he fell like lightning, if one stronger than the strong man has bound him, if his chaining was just around the corner 2,000 years ago, why does evil continue to rampage unchecked in this world? Why are the Jewish people still irrationally hated by all nations? Why are the disciples of Jesus still put to death for their faith? Why is the world continually wallowing in darkness, filth, sin, and debauchery, and corruption? Why has the devil not yet been chained and sealed in the abyss? If Jesus really ascended to the right hand of the Father and all authority on heaven and earth has been given to him and all things placed under his feet, what's up? What is the holdup? The answer comes from Hebrews chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, where it says, "At present, we do not yet see everything in subjection to him." I would think that if Jesus was the Messiah and the kingdom was at hand, he should have driven the Roman legions into the sea like that herd of swine charging into Lake Galilee. But that's not what happened, is it? Instead, just one generation after his resurrection, the legions marched through the Holy Land, setting it ablaze, and they conquered the holy city and utterly demolished it, blaspheming the house of God, and they left not one stone upon another. The Roman authorities hunted down and killed the disciples of Jesus. They pursued them, arrested them, tried them like dangerous criminals, and put them to death. And they persecuted the Jewish people ruthlessly. And the Jewish world was plunged into a deep, dark time of suffering and exile, which has lasted until this very day. From our perspective, here on earth, if anything, it looks like Satan won a stunning major victory in the first century, one from which the people of God have scarcely yet recovered. And what kind of good news is this? The answer, of course, is that the gospel message, the good news message our master proclaimed, was conditional. The good news was simultaneously bad news. It was good news so long as the nation repented. If Israel repented, they could attain the kingdom. But if not, then the stroke of judgment would fall upon the nation. History had reached a fork in the road at which it could go left or right. Jesus attempted to hasten the day of redemption by bringing the generation to repentance. But he made it clear that his generation teetered on the brink. If they fell one way, they would topple into disaster. But if they tipped the other way, they would land in the kingdom. Well, the nation tottered. It teetered. It tipped. And it toppled into the disaster of exile. We get a bird's eye explanation of what happened and how things actually played out from the perspective of heaven in Revelation chapter 12, the vision of Revelation chapter 12. And that's our text today. It begins like this. "And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth." Revelation 12, 1 and 2. The woman with a crown of 12 stars on her head is Zion, as depicted in the prophecies of Isaiah. She symbolizes the nation of Israel. Her pregnancy symbolizes the coming of the Messiah. The Messiah is the child she's pregnant with. Her birth pains are the Chevle Mashiach, the birth pains of the Messiah. That is the travail and tribulation which come upon the world prior to the final redemption and the coming of the Messiah. Zion, in this vision, is about to bring forth the Messiah. Then we read, "And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon, with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems." Wow, epic stuff. A dragon with 7 heads? Sounds like ancient Near Eastern Tiamat. What do the 7 heads mean? Well, we don't actually need to guess. The symbolism is explained for us in the book of Revelation. In Revelation chapter 17, 9 and 10, it says, "This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are the 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. They are also 7 kings." All right, that might sound more cryptic than it really is. Believe it or not, it's easy. The 7 heads refer to the city of Rome, which has always been called the city built on 7 hills. And they symbolize 7 emperors, starting with the first emperor of Rome, Augustus, then Tiberius, Gaius Caligula, Claudius, Nero, Vespasian, Titus. The dragon is the devil, manifest and embodied in the physical garments of Rome. It says, "His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it." Revelation 12:4. Okay, this is still pretty easy. The stars are the nations and their angelic princes that fell under the power of Roman advances across the Mediterranean world as the empire is expanding. The prophecy implies that Satan, who is the angelic prince of the Roman Empire, as we've learned, swept these nations down and under his power to take control of the land of Israel and the Jewish people in order to intercept the birth of the Messiah and to stop the redemption. This is what it means when it says, "The dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it." Now, I'm not a preterist, nor do I argue for preterism. But historically speaking, it's easy to understand the dragon that stood before the woman as Rome, and how these 7 heads span the life of Jesus and the generation of the apostolic era up until John on Patmos, and how they interface with the story. So we start with Augustus. Augustus is emperor from 27 to 14 Common Era, right after Julius Caesar. And during his reign, the Messiah is born, just like it says. Herod the Great is appointed. What does he do? He tries to kill the baby and take the life of the King of the Jews, as we read in the Gospels. This is just like it says in this, just like the prophecy says. He's followed by Tiberius, who is 14 Common Era to 37 Common Era, and he's the emperor during Jesus' adulthood. He appoints the high priest Annas, Caiaphas, Pontius Pilate, all of these characters, the 3 men responsible for the execution of Jesus. Just like the dragon is trying to devour the child. This guy is followed by Gaius Caligula, 37 Common Era to 41 Common Era, early apostolic era. He attempts to force the Jewish people to erect an idolatrous image of himself, a statue of Jupiter in the temple, making himself candidate for Antichrist, putting up the abomination of desolation. It's a major undertold story of the apostolic era. This is a big story that almost ended with the destruction of Jerusalem and a full-on war with Rome before Paul had even started his ministry. The legions were on their way. Then he's followed by Claudius, 41 Common Era to 54 Common Era, mid-apostolic era. This is the emperor who expelled the Jews from Rome, targeting actually the Jewish believers of Rome for persecution for agitating in the name of Christus, that is Christ, in the name of the Messiah. And he's followed by Nero in 54 Common Era to 68 Common Era, the first imperial persecutor to specifically target the disciples of Jesus, and who dispatched, by the way, also he's the one who dispatched Rome's legions in the war against Judea. So he carried out savageries against the believers and was widely believed by the believers in those days to be the Antichrist. He instituted the policy by which believers could be put to death if they did not deny Jesus before a tribunal. Then after him, in the year of the three emperors, none of which were actually emperor, comes Vespasian. Vespasian, 68 Common Era to 79 Common Era, he's the principal general of the Roman legions in the Jewish war, devastated the Galilee and Judea, imposed harsh measures against the Jewish people, the Jewish tax, and specifically instituted a campaign to hunt down the house of David. How about that? He's followed by his son Titus, 79 Common Era to 81 Common Era. He is the conqueror of Jerusalem, the Roman general who entered the Holy of Holies, who burned the temple, and the one who initiated this current exile, the Roman exile. Those are the seven heads. And this provides us some context for the words. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. This refers to the Roman occupation of the land of Israel, and ultimately the death of the Messiah, his crucifixion on a Roman cross, and the consequential destruction of Jerusalem and the beginning of the current exile, all of which the passage now, this vision now goes on to describe, picking it up in verse 5. It says, "She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne." All right, this is easy. The male child is the Messiah, the one destined to rule all nations with a rod of iron, as it says in Psalm 2, as it says in Psalm 110. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Well, this refers to the ascension of the resurrected Jesus. It's a bit of a surprise. It's a game changer, actually, not part of the anticipated program. Rather than slay the dragon or bind it in chains and toss it in the abyss, the Messiah slips away. And we know how it went down. We know the story. Then the dragon, how the dragon responds. We read in verse 6, "And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days." It's a little cryptic. A little more cryptic there, but I believe this refers to the Jewish revolt and the flight of the believers from Jerusalem and the beginning of the exile. The 1,260 days are 3.5 years, and they represent the duration of this period of time of exile. Meanwhile, we read, "Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven." Okay, what's this war in heaven? When did this take place? Well, this is where the prophecy gets a little squishy because, hey, these events are happening in heaven. This is all behind the scenes stuff. But from the perspective of John on Patmos, he sees the war in heaven as symbolizing the lead up to the Jewish revolt and the destruction of Jerusalem. It goes on, "And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him." That's verse 9. Okay, what was Satan doing in heaven in the first place? Well, we learned a few weeks ago that he was doing his job. He has a role in the heavenly courtroom. He's the prosecuting attorney. So his domain is in heaven because that's where he made his accusations in judgment. He is the accuser of Israel, the one who accuses God's people, the prosecuting attorney who prosecutes his case against all human beings, accusing all human beings of sin and insisting on a just verdict of death, insisting that human beings are not worthy of the immortality for which they were created because they have sinned. That's his argument. So it says, "And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, 'Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah have come, for the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives even unto death.'" That's chapter 12, verses 10 and 11. So the loud voice in heaven announces the advent of, this is the advent of the kingdom, the Messianic era. The saints have vanquished him in the heavenly court by the blood of the Lamb. That is the atoning merit of our Master's suffering. And because they clung to the word of their testimony, that's their testimony, they testify in before the throne of glory in the heavenly court. They refused to deny their allegiance to Jesus when the Roman tribunals attempted to force them to do so. They paid for their testimony with their lives, and through their steadfast conviction, they prevailed. So it says, "Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short." So Revelation 12:12 introduces what we could call the wrath of the dragon. He goes at once to make war on the Jewish people. As I've already described, under Nero's armies, the Roman legions march on Galilee and Judea, sack Jerusalem, destroy the temple, send the Jewish people into exile. And this is what's being described when it says, "When the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child." All right, so that's Zion, that's Israel, that's the Jewish people. "But the two wings of the great eagle were given to the woman, so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place, where she was nourished for a time, and times, and half a time, from the presence of the serpent." So the exiles of Israel go into the wilderness of exile. The serpent pursues them. It says, "And the serpent poured out water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, so that he might cause her to be swept away with the flood." So he's pursuing with various pogroms and persecutions that we know of all the way through the first century. Water pouring out like a river from its mouth represents Roman authority, Roman power, the Roman legions. "But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank up the river which the dragon poured out of his mouth." So the earth assists in the form of the nations, the wide diaspora of the Jewish people among the nations, exhausting the Roman efforts against the Jewish people until in John's day, Rome changed its policies and began to target a specific sect of the Jewish people, which it referred to as the superstition of the Christians. And that's what we read in the words of Revelation 12:17. "So the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her children, who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus." Revelation 12:17. And this is where we are in the swing of history, according to the book of Revelation. This is where it leaves us. We are still in the era that the prophecy calls the wrath of the dragon. And it explains a lot. According to this 2,000-year-old book of Apocalypse, we would expect to see two things happening then until the final redemption. One, a satanic war against the Jewish people, and two, a satanic war against the disciples of Jesus. The spiritual forces of darkness are enraged with the woman, that is with Zion, with the Jewish people, with Israel, and with the rest of her children, that is the disciples of Jesus, the believers, those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. So this prophecy in Revelation 12 gives us a glimpse behind the veil. And that's what an apocalypse like the book of Revelation is supposed to do. It's supposed to lift the veil and show us what's happening in the spiritual world behind the scenes. And it answers our question. Why is it that at present we do not yet see everything in subjection to him? And the answer is that we live in this period of time that we might call the era of the wrath of the dragon. He fights like a cornered beast, like an injured animal. Hence the darkness and the hatred and the anti-Semitism, the persecutions, the martyrs, the pogroms, the Holocaust, the bigotry, the intolerance, the terrorism, the suffering, and the state of the world we live in today, the lies and the deception. But we do not lose hope. We know that we stand even now, even today, on the very edge. Only a moment, as it were, poised for that moment when the sound of the seventh trumpet is going to be heard, and then the wrath of the Lamb will come, and then they will say, hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne, from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand? Maranatha.